What's up, and welcome back to Nowstalgia Pod, bringing you Nowstalgia Ranks once again. This is Pat Sheehan, joined by my trusty co-host, Dave. He's a genius, the Pablo Picasso of the rap game. Martinson. Dave, how you doing, man?
Uh, Wake up, Mr. West. We're ranking your albums. Tune in.
Yeah. I think our shared love of Kanye was one of the things that really brought us together to do the podcast originally.
It's true.
When we first decided to record, we knew the Life of Pablo was coming out. And one of our first episodes, if you go back and check that out, way back.
Second episode.
Wow. Jeez. So
Audio
right
only days. Go get that.
We did a deep breakdown. We've never done another pod like that again, but a deep breakdown of the Life of Pablo, song by song, track by track. That was when we were still figuring out what we wanted the pod to be.
Yeah.
And we've been to Kanye concerts together. We've spent now it seems like hours on the pod discussing Kanye albums and controversy and hype.
4 album reviews officially on the pod.
Got a lot of content out of this, man. So
technically 5 if we count Kid Cudi Ghosts. So yeah. So, Kanye's always coming up because that's Kanye.
So why not do another hour on him, right? Because there's a ton to talk about. And I think we should probably just caveat at the beginning. This is going to be probably like an hour, maybe a little over an hour long podcast. We could do several hours if we wanted to break down and dissect everything about Kanye. So there's probably going to be some gaps, some oversights. Drop that in the comments if you're watching on youtube.com/nostalgiapod, or if you're on soundcloud.com/nostalgiapod, finding any way to listen to the podcast, hit us up on @nostalgiapod on Twitter and let us know your thoughts about all this. But Dave, maybe we should start, as we do with most of these, Kanye West. First time you were really introduced to him, that you became aware of him. Do you remember?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I don't really know. I have to think it was graduation time. I don't want to think, just because I was too young to really know anything before that. And I think it was really, I just must have been knowledge of probably Stronger, maybe even Gold Digger, something like that. I'm not really sure. And maybe Heartless as well, stuff that was really popular on the radio. But then obviously became fully invested in the orbit around when Dark Twisted Fantasy came out when I was 18.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people our age, that graduation, 808s, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, that 07 to 10 run is when a lot of people really start tuning into him. It's actually interesting because I have a very specific memory of my first time ever listening to Kanye West. I was driving with my sister back from our grandparents' cottage on the lake in New York. This is like the most white, rich sounding thing about me, for sure. But we were driving and she put on this album called The College Dropout. And I immediately was like, holy shit. Being a 13-year-old at this time and being very much interested in what my older siblings were doing, this immediately caught my attention. I listened to it nonstop on my CD player, back in the day, with the headphones went over the head and right around the ear. And this immediately became my favorite album and probably remained my favorite album up until college age. And still one of my favorite albums of all time. And The Late Registration was actually one of the first albums I bought myself. I remember buying the CD in my local Best Buy. Shout out to the Best Buy in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, right on the Lanesboro border. But yeah, I remember wearing that out too, and just like laying in my bed listening to The Late Registration a lot. So it's funny because I feel like I was less tuned into graduation and 808s, and then obviously My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, 2010 in college, everybody listening to it, everybody talking about it. The songs were just amazing. And I feel like that's why I really tuned back into Kanye, especially because we'll mention that 07, 08 time was a interesting time in Kanye's life, an interesting time in his music and his public perception. So I was a little bit out on Kanye, and then I think the narrative for a lot of people was My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy reeled people back in. Just kind of before we jump into the albums, we probably should start with them earlier because there is so much to get to. Your perception of Kanye as an artist to follow and root for and consume, how has that changed over the years for you?
Huh. Well, nowadays he's just older, and like most rappers, that represents a curve on the quality graph, as
Hmm.
most people know. Listen to the more recent stuff. The bars aren't quite as intricate, as thoughtful, as intelligent as they once were. Kind of obvious thing to happen. Um, but kind of beyond that, beyond like the individual output, album to album, I mean, everyone talks about the Kanye West influence. Obviously, such a famous figure in and outside of his music, with the celebrity and everything. But bringing back sampling, soul sampling, but just kind of bringing back like heavy reliance on sampling in the mid 2000s, uh, kind of kills the bling era of
Hmm.
rap, of which Kanye came up, as if with Rockefeller Records producing, he was still kind of in that lane as well. But he basically ends that once his
Hmm.
music gets, rapturously received. College Dropout, obviously his first album, 441,000 first week. He was a star right away. And he kind of does it all over again with 808s, of course, with auto tune and heavy melody in hip hop. Not that he invented mainstream use of auto tune. Of course, T Pain was very successful already at this time, but kind of doing all that, you then get the common refrain that 808s kind of birthed Drake, or what Drake would become, stuff like that. Drake, the person who would one day take Kanye's crown as the top of the rap game. So his whole career, and basically the ups and downs of it, and the changes and dead ends and everything about it, is just very instructive on what would follow, because the industry largely would react in turn. So there's always a lot to learn about just the greater genre, if you really dig into it.
Yeah, in preparation for this, and I think you really summed it up well. Um, it seems like Kanye has always kind of been one step ahead of the rap game, and I think as of late that may be shifting a little bit. And like you said, he's older, and like anybody, when you get older, you lose a step. You're a little bit less dynamic. Maybe athletes age and they lose a step, and it can be said the same as for musicians and artists. But um, just thinking about how he came up actually interesting. So uh, he was the producer on the Blueprint, Jay Z's sixth album, and didn't produce every
Here's
song, but
four
was
tracks.
was heavily involved. And
Mm,
that really put him on the map. But he had been making music in the Chicago scene for a while before that, producing a lot. And I think
mm,
his ability as a producer, it almost like hurt him in the beginning, because he was this he was seen as this like creator and curator, but not necessarily as someone that could be the front man. He's pretty public about how he was not having a really hard time getting a record deal, how no one really wanted to sign him, but then Rockefeller took a chance on him, didn't want to potentially
mm,
lose him as a producer, and
right.
really give him a shot. And from there, being in the forefront, he really shaped not only the persona of what a rapper could be, but then obviously the sound. And I think that that's a major part of this. He's the kid with the pink polos and the backpack. He's the kid who's talking about feelings and getting into car crashes and vulnerability and thoughtful things, and not necessarily money, hose, and
Mm.
cars again, whatever that line is, and
I mean,
breathe
he,
in,
he
breathe
grew
out.
up middle class,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that was kind of the thing, right? Is Dame Dash and everyone at Rockefeller just didn't see it as him
Mhm.
as a rapper, because they just didn't think they could sell it, because he wasn't a gangster. He wasn't from the streets, and at the
Right.
time there was no lane for that. And like you said, yeah, Dame was just like, well, we'll probably eventually lose him to someone else. We might as well keep him around, even if we're more invested in him as the producer. And you know, like like I said, like he produced 4 tracks on the Blueprint, but not just any 4 tracks, like 4 of the best songs on the Blueprint: Take Over, Heart of the City, Izzo, as well as
Hmm.
Never Change.
Yeah.
And, you know, bringing soul sampling to the forefront as a student of No ID who he met in Chicago, became this figure right away. And obviously producing for other people on the rock like Beanie Siegel and whatnot. But to finally get that record deal and just kind of evolve, like what it means to be rapper again, just kind of killing off the last vestiges of the bling era and all that.
Hmm.
And obviously, not that gangster rap would go away or stop being mainstream, and thankfully it hasn't. But it just kind of helped, I guess, diversify a little bit what can what can be accomplished. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny to reflect on that again, given where Kanye is at now. A lot of the things in his lyrics now, and just how he's acted as a public figure, it doesn't always seem as congruous as what it was like for him to get a start. Obviously, back in 2002.
Yeah. And just to kind of, I think, piggyback off your point about the, growing up middle class, his mom was an intellectual.
Mm.
He lived in Asia. I think it was actually China with his mom
Yes.
when she was teaching on a Fulbright scholarship. Dad was part of the Black Panthers and was a like figure, a political and social activist down in the Atlanta area, the Georgia area. And this isn't a person who was necessarily growing up with the same hardships as a lot of his peers in the rap game. And I think that actually helped him stand out and make that lane and also stand out for some of his song concepts. I was talking last night when I was preparing for this with Julianne, my fiance now, and I was like, yeah, it's crazy that he wrote Jesus Walks on his first album and put that out as a single and that it was a
Mm.
huge hit. And
Yeah,
she was like,
top
that was
20.
on his first album? Yeah. And I just couldn't believe it because that's such a risk for an artist to make and
Mm.
such a thoughtful song. And to think about where he is now, he's really transitioned from that, almost that like social mind, wanting to do better, wanting to enrich the neighborhoods of Chicago to just like provocateur. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to see him almost kind of like lose himself within the persona over the years. It's been a really interesting ride for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you can just spell it out. He went from the guy who went off script during the Hurricane Katrina benefit to say George Bush doesn't like black people, doesn't care about black people. I forget the quote.
Yeah, doesn't care
And
about
he
black people.
he he went from that to saying slavery was a choice a few years
Yeah.
back. And even if he kind of walked that back, it's just kind of represents the degradation. The guy who made crack
Mhm.
music
Right.
to what he is now is just kind of baffling a little bit.
Yeah, and it's I think to refine that point, if you go back and listen to our reviews of his most recent albums, Kids See Ghosts, we talked about how some of the lyrics on that were the most thoughtful he's been since like the mid,
Mm.
aughts, and it's just sad that we're like giving him credit for that at this
Yeah.
point because he had the potential to be a person who was really using his music to like expound upon and push for change. And I think his own personal battles kind of consumed that part of him. Um, I feel like we've kind of set the stage. Let's jump right into the College Dropout. Um, I mean, for a debut album, this is a 10 of 10. And this you really can't do better than this as a first album. And obviously, Through the Wire, a song about a car crash that he had after falling asleep on a ride home from a studio, getting into a car crash, jaw wired shut, writes and writes the song in the hospital, sings the song with his jaw wired shut. You can hear it right in his vocals, talks about it. First single puts him on the map. Awesome.
Mm.
But it's funny listening back to this. That Shaka Khan sample, I think, stands out more for me than anything from that song. But there's just like almost no skips on this, like maybe like one or two songs. I think Workout Plan doesn't age that well for me now. And it's the sort of thing where I'm just kind of like, okay, this is Kanye being stupid and silly. But like there's like just song after song, even the deep cuts, something like Never Let Me Down, I think is one of the most underrated songs in Kanye's whole catalog. And just to hear him like just like pop off on this. Is so exciting every time I listen to it. What did you think of the College Dropout listening back?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many keepers on it, as you said. Through the Wire, notably, that was actually on his debut mixtape, Get Well
Mhm.
Soon, which came out uh, back in December 2002. College Dropout
Yep.
doesn't come out till February 2004. So Through the Wire had been known for some time, and that really was the solo Kanye as a rapper song that got him the respect from everyone at the label. And yeah, I mean, I'll just say it. I think the new workout plan is bad. Like, I think that's a clear skip. It's a bad track.
Yeah.
But other than that, I really can't really have any problem with anything. I mean, yeah, maybe you don't want to go back to the litany of skits after you've
Sure.
heard them once or twice. But slow jams. That was Kanye's first number one hit, as well as the
Hmm.
first number one for Twista and Jamie
And Jamie
Foxx.
Foxx.
Of course, the Twista feature, very memorable. But
Hmm.
I'm just struck with a lot of I guess memorable flourishes that stand out as like Kanye trademarks now, like using the kids to sing in the chorus on
Yeah.
"We Don't Care." Very memorable to me as a Kanye thing. Um, All Falls Down, the Lauryn Hill sample. The College Dropout famously leaked many months before it came out, and
Hmm.
Kanye did a lot of editing and removed songs after that. He's always been doing it. If we really
I was
look
gonna
back,
say.
and he never actually cleared it. He wanted to actually have Lauryn Hill's vocals be the song, right? But he couldn't get that cleared, so it's just an interpolation instead. But still an amazing track. Um, and Spaceship, of course, very notable for the presence of GLC and Consequence, who Kanye had produced for and even rapped a little bit with in Chicago before he even had signed to Rockefeller. School Spirit, notably censored because that was the only way he could clear the Aretha Franklin sample. And basically everyone around him and everyone has said in like oral histories and stuff that if they couldn't clear that Aretha Franklin sample, there's just not enough to the song to justify it. So they
Yeah.
had to do it, had to censor it. It's cool to hear. And yeah, I guess Freeway's verse on 2 words also quite
Yeah.
legendary. But I mean that song's awesome. Most Steph's great on that too. And then talk about a great finish to an album, Through the Wire, Family Business, and Last Call.
Oh my
Last
God.
Call, a nod to Jay-Z outros. So
Yep.
yeah, very I mean, yeah, people know.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is it's like what more can we actually add to the discourse on the College Dropout, 16 years later that hasn't already been said. But yeah, it's funny because I'm just like scrolling through the track list and I'm like, yep, I love this moment on this song. I mean, I mentioned Never Let Me Down. Jay Ivy bringing in a spoken word person who really has no other song credits, but just kind of like steals that song is pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Jesus Walks, all the different versions of it, I think are great, and also the music videos around it are fantastic. All Falls Down also has a great music video. This was when Kanye's music videos. I mean, I think they're always pretty interesting, but these ones just like really stand out in my mind for that era. Eh, There's just so many cool moments on. The gospel singers on Jesus Walks is something that he comes back to a lot more and incorporates throughout his career. So it's just cool to see how Kanye was always Kanye, but just was really like operating at a high level right from the get go.
Yeah,
Pretty amazing to see.
yeah. And one of my favorite things about Jesus Walks is that it's a very like militant vibe
Hmm.
while still being about Kanye's personal religious beliefs. And
Ready? Whoop.
and
Yep.
everyone at the label, they didn't think that had any commercial appeal at all. They did not know how to sell a song so blatantly religious, and yet it was a top 20 track uh, in multiple countries. I also just want to note that the Get 'em High beat, it just goes so hard. And I just remember being very hyped when he actually played that at our Yeezus tour stop in Albany, New York. Obviously,
Yeah.
he would, the deep cuts, the middle of the set list, he would kind of switch it tour leg to tour leg. So you weren't sure exactly what you were going to get when you actually saw him. And he did Get 'em High, which was really cool to see. I'm sure he's only performed that song probably a dozen times since then, if you think about that. So, um,
Oh,
yeah, I guess one other
that.
thing to note too is right after the College Dropout release in 2004, he does found good music and Common and John Legend, and I believe No ID are, I believe, among the first signees. and we know good music is still exists in one form or another to this day. I mean, obviously, Donda was still released as a good music release under Def Jam. So yeah,
Great point on the good music. 'Cause I think that's another part of Kanye's legacy is just his ability to like find talent and elevate them, in collaboration. We're going to be talking about some of those as we move on. Late registration drops a year later, and I guess like a year and a half later, because I think that's later on in 2005. Yeah,
yeah,
August.
August '05, so about a year and a half.
And similarly, this is part of this like it was supposed to be, I think, like 4 or 5 track run of like college school themed stuff. Originally, it turned out only being 3, which is fine. But
Yes. Good Ass Job never came out, famously.
um, late registration stands out to me for just how it seems like Kanye's going grander. He's going for a bigger sound. One of the first uh, songs that comes to mind when I think about this album is "Diamonds" from Sierra Leone, and just uh, a song that sounds so like monumentous, and it has such a build up. I actually love both versions of this
Hmm.
on the album. I actually probably played the second one, the bonus track, more because I think that's a little bit more like interesting to hear Kanye talk about his own um, controversies and squabbles of fame. Um, Late registration doesn't hit as well for me as College Dropout. I think there's a few more songs that I don't find myself coming back to as much, but definitely I think a really strong sophomore album, and critically received that way, and also sold just a shit ton of records. So late registration, your thoughts?
So I actually like this more than College Dropout. I just think the rapping is a
Hmm.
lot higher level, song to song on this. Uh, and it's funny because I'm not even like a huge Diamonds from Sierra Leone guy. I don't really run those songs back. I also don't really care too much for Hey Mama or Roses, which are quite popular songs.
Yeah,
But I mean, Touch the Sky, the introduction of Lupe Fiasco, his fellow Chicagoan, huge hit. Gold Digger, obviously, I think
oh,
second or third biggest hit of Kanye's career, with the Ray Charles sample famously. But just, I can't get enough of songs like Drive Slow,
yeah.
Crack Music, even a lighter song like Celebration is just so easy to revisit.
I was gonna
And
say
I mean,
that
bar for
ending.
bar, We Major, I think, is the best rapping he had done to this point.
I mean, all those songs you mentioned are just fantastic. Fantastic. I love the ending songs on this. Celebration, Gone, and then Late, and then obviously you have the Diamonds from Sierra Leone bonus track if you're listening to like the expanded album version. But yeah, I think Late is such a like lighter but like great song. Just really fun to like bounce to. I love Gone too. Just the flow on that between him, Consequence, and Cameron is just fantastic. That middle though, like Bring Me Down with Brandy, something I don't
Mhm.
go back to a lot. Addiction is a skip for me on this, which
Yep.
I think Roses is a good song, and I think is actually more meaningful post his mother's passing. I think and obviously I don't think the song was written about his mom at that time, but I think just the way you can expand that into Kanye wanting to, you know, be there for somebody in their somebody he cares about in their time of need. Um, but that beginning is really great, and the ending is really great. I think the middle just loses me a little bit, but yeah, like you said, I think there's just some really great songs, and it's just
Mhm.
it's hard to like argue with the two. I have to say this felt lower on my list than I expected, but it's still like I mean, one of my favorite albums probably of all time. I go back to a
Yeah.
lot.
I think one notable thing about the sound is now that Kanye had more personal funds as well as album budget, he was able to bring in a lot of string production on late registration that
Yeah.
he just couldn't afford for College Dropout. So there's a lot of live orchestration present on this. And he also worked with John Bryan, who had never worked on hip hop before. Obviously, we talked about him recently with Mac Miller's Circles.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, to have these two records and then to have Graduation follow it up, it goes down as, I mean, it's probably a top. It's definitely a top 10 3 album run in hip hop. Obviously, there's a lot of competition, but it's pretty unimpeachable.
Yeah, and then why don't we just jump right to Graduation? It's probably notable that Kanye was touring with U2 prior to this album's release, and or even development. I think that actually puts him in this frame of mind of wanting to create these really grand anthemic type songs. And man, it's really hard to top the College Dropout only registration, but Graduation, I mean, song for song is right up there with them for me. I think just kind of going through, there's certainly I think a couple of songs that I don't necessarily love, but I gotta say
Just
that like
say them,
begin
say them now. There are two bad songs on this.
Drunken Hot Girls, not a fan.
It's fucking horrible.
What would be the second one for you?
I don't think Barry Bonds is very good. It's better than
Uh,
Drunken Hot Girls, but those two songs back to back in particular, I think hurts.
some people really like Barry Bonds, which I think is just like that 2000s Little Wayne love and just like
Yeah.
overlooking, that the song really isn't that great. But I agree, those would be the two that I don't really play. But after that, I mean, I think every other song in here is just fucking great, man. Like that beginning run, Good Morning, Champion, Stronger, I Wonder, Good Life, Can't Tell Me Nothing. Those first six songs, I mean, come on. Is there even
Yeah.
a better six songs in a row on any other Kanye album?
Maybe not. It's always funny to reflect too the commercial battle that was between Kanye's Graduation and 50 Cent's Curtis, who would sell more records head to head. And leading, just a few years beforehand, everyone would have picked 50. But Graduation just kept the rocket ship going. 957,000 first week sales. To that, I mean, this is iTunes might just barely exist. That's people buying this record at a
Yeah.
store. You know, um, no one touches that number these days except for Taylor Swift.
Yep.
Huge, but also reflects the times. And yeah, Graduation just has the most hits on any album he's had to this point. Probably, actually, no, probably of all his albums, there's the most hits on this.
For
And
sure.
Can't Tell Me Nothing is really notable as one of, if not his greatest song ever, but also his first real anthem.
Yeah.
And is like that's just kind of like a 4 quadrant song. It's appealing to everyone, no matter where you're from, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, Graduation's true. I mean, minus the two bad songs, but truly like the whole package. But it was like the only way Kanye could find a way to succeed past College Dropout late registration was to get bigger, and he managed to actually do it to great effect here. Because I mean, so many of these songs still to this day, Can't Tell Me Nothing's the number one, but Good Life with T-Pain still a huge party smash. Stronger, obviously, the famous Daft Punk sample.
Mhm.
I mean, just to even pull off that Daft Punk sample as effectively as he did is kind of mind blowing. And then also Flashing Lights. There's just so many huge songs here.
Yeah, it's. I want to go back to Stronger real quick because Stronger really is this song that almost makes it more accessible for other rap artists to really start to incorporate house and electronic music into their records. And it's been credited as probably one of the most influential uh, singles to reintroduce things like disco back into the
Hmm.
mainstream music scene in the 2010s and late aughts. And just the fact that Kanye takes this Daft Punk song, EDM was growing in popularity at this time, but obviously still not as mainstream as it is now. And to take that and just kind of like totally make it so accessible to everybody, just an amazing accomplishment. And then you mentioned Good Life with T-Pain, which I mean, just an absolutely wonderful song and really fun to listen to. But you start to see some of the DNA of 808s and what's kind of coming up for him in that collaboration and working with autotune. At least T-Pain, obviously famously known for his use of autotune. So it's just an album where you start to see how his influence expands beyond just the rap genre, because I think without him really making EDM as accessible as it was through Stronger and kind of being the leader there, he makes it accessible for all other genres. We start to see after this a lot of rock bands really working with more electronic music into their songs. It's just a real accomplishment, and Graduation, I think, is him like operating at his highest level. This is also the last album he makes with his mother alive, and I think that's a really important piece of this, because at this time his mother was his manager, very close, and you know, after his mother passes is really when his career starts to take interesting twists and turns. It feels like to this point he's on this trajectory straight up, and uh, Graduation is kind of the culmination of that. And then when his mother Donda passes away from cosmetic surgery in, was it 2000, late 2007, after this album dropped,
Yeah.
that's when a lot of things start to change in Kanye's life. He also ends his engagement with uh, what's her name, Alyssa Pfeiffer.
Yeah, yeah, the fashion designer, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, and
there was a long relationship to that point.
yeah, and he's just in a very like dark place at this time, leading to uh, him coming on stage during the MTV Music Awards and interrupting Taylor Swift, saying that she shouldn't have won and Single Lady should have won. He kind of gets publicly ostracized. He gets taken off his tour with Lady Gaga at the time, which imagine seeing Lady Gaga and Kanye together, like just a amazing double bill of a concert. He's really in this dark place. Maybe that happens after 808s. Actually,
it does. No, it does. But I think this is like one of like the first like moments where I just being too young to experience it. Oh, it hurts because his mother dies, but then he immediately goes on his first like really big international tour, the Glow in the Dark tour, which also had on certain legs Rihanna, Nerd, Lupe, I think Santa Gold as well.
Oh
Really
God.
famous for like its use of lights and whatnot, and had the Bonnaroo controversy was part of this tour. And that I think that's just a cool footnote, because you look at the images, you try and like find some video of this tour. It just looks really cool, and obviously Kanye has made a huge uh, name for unique tour set design. Of course, with the pyramid for Yeezus and the floating stage for the St. Pablo tour, even performing in a box with Cudi, similar to how Lord had done. So the first iteration of this, but also his first really big international tour. He had done a few other tours around College Dropout and Late Registration. And as you mentioned, he had toured with a few rock bands, but this was, I think, like the big moment. And like you said, his mother dies, and he does not follow up Graduation the way anyone expected. Good Ass Job never gets released, and he just goes in a direction no one saw coming with 808s.
Yeah. What is it about 808s that you think like what do you think it is about 808s that you see as so different from those first three Kanye albums? Like, explain that a little more.
Well, he's just singing. He's singing and using lots of auto tune. No one thought that would be what he would do. It's kind of simple.
And we talked about how Kanye went from making the College Dropout, getting a little bit grander and larger in scale with Late Registration, going anthemic with Graduation, and then this is a very minimalist album. It's very toned down, very cold. There's some big moments, but for the most part, it's a lot quieter and a lot more emotional and personal than I think some of Kanye's albums had been to that point, especially after following up Graduation. The La La La, Wait Till I Get My Money Right. Like, Kanye is talking about his own personal experience, but it's not as accessible as something like Coldest Winter. Like, that's an incredibly personal and heartbreaking song to listen to, and Kanye just hadn't done songs like this before.
Yeah, no, he hadn't. And a lot of people have some like grand affinity for this album, especially looking back. It was still well received, but his first album to get any sort of mixed reception or mixed fan reception when it came out, just because of its uh, failure to meet expectations due to what it actually was. Uh, and like it's still relatively well liked, but I think just the best songs on 808s just don't hold a candle to the best songs on his other good albums to me.
Mhm.
Like I don't know, it's not even close, honestly, for me. I don't find myself going back to this one too much. Not that there isn't stuff to recommend, but it's just not what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I agree. For me, like, I believe that first like run is pretty strong. Say You Will, Welcome to Heartbreak, Heartless, and Amazing. I think are all like pretty strong songs. Not I don't think anywhere near like Kanye's like near Kanye's best stuff. Paranoid's all right, but then like RoboCop, I don't really like that much. Honestly, I think the like up and down of the sonics of it are pretty cool, but
Right.
just like the lyrics on it are kind of tough at points. Um, See You in My Nightmares, again, another Little Wayne Kanye thing that I don't really find myself going back to. Streetlights is a pretty good song, I think.
Yeah. That's the thing. People like gas the fuck out of Streetlights though. I
Yeah,
can't go that far. Like I like Streetlights. It's probably one of the best songs on 808s, but like
right.
it's not
It's not
Kanye's
top
top
tier
10. It's probably
Kanye.
not even his top 20. Like let's
No,
slow down a bit.
no, I agree. And then obviously you get like the live Pinocchio story at the end. I mean, this is Kanye's Sad Boy album, and I think the main like legacy of it is not only the choice of using the 808 drum style and how that became something that was a lot more popular in rap music
Yeah.
after he used it, and the use
It's
of
the
auto
default
tune.
now. Talk about the
Right,
influence. This is that's all you hear in hip hop now is an 808. Any kind of
right.
trap music.
Which is interesting too because it had just been like a dormant uh, drum instrument for like 20 years, and then he's just like, oh, I just want to use this, and now it's so popular. But um, like auto tune obviously being something that was heavily used and people just continue to use now. But I think just the like sad boy album of it all, and how many like sad boy rappers do we have now? And people like Travis Scott, Juice World prior to his passing were
Yeah.
very, very much advocates for the influence that 808 had on their musical style and their careers. So this album, even though it's not the best Kanye, still just has its fingers in the DNA of rap now. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Welcome to Heartbreak's notable as the introduction to the world for Kid Cudi, who
Yeah.
would then sign to Good Music and of course release Man in the Moon 1 a year after this album, as well as the Kid Named Cudi debut mixtape. So that's notable. Mr. Hudson on Paranoid, he's probably one of the first like failed Good Music signings where he signs to Good Music after linking with Kanye and then is like barely heard from again. Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, Say You Will too. People really like Say You Will. Doesn't do a whole lot for me, honestly. And like
Which,
Heartless, the big hit. Heartless is the most popular song off this album, but like it's a good song. But like compared to his other good songs, I'm not too interested.
yeah. I was talking before about the controversy that was leading up in Kanye's life during this time, and I think the critical and public reception to 808s is probably a major, a significant narrative in that because Kanye, like I said, had been on this trajectory of just critical acclaim, huge stardom, and this kind of took a bit of a left turn for him. Not necessarily that it was a failure of an album, but just not nearly as liked or acclaimed as the first three. So then there's this very turbulent period of time. The whole Taylor Swift thing get kicked off Lady Gaga's tour. Kanye just decides to focus on fashion for a while and then is like, nah, I'm going to go hole up in Hawaii. I'm going to fly all my favorite producers out. I'm going to have technicians around the clock so I can record whenever I want. He's sleep deprived. What would Wu Tang do? And out of all this comes my beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy. Man, talk about influential albums in my life. This might be the album I've listened to most out of,
Mm.
I'm trying to think like what other albums are really up there. I mean, other than song like albums from my teen years, which, all I would do is like sit and listen to CDs a lot of the time. This is probably the one I find myself coming back to most. Just a really, probably my favorite Kanye album. Just not stuff on my list, but I love this album. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it happened to make our best albums of the 2010s list. Both of our number ones. Check that out, youtube.com/nostalgiapod. So real ones know where the list is going.
Right.
But yeah, it's, I mean, one of, if not the greatest comebacks in music in terms of someone being as high as they were, going as low as they were, then getting back damn near as high as they once were. And in this case, Kanye going back around as getting as maximalist as he possibly could.
Right.
Such a stark contrast to 808s, and a welcome one.
Yeah.
And you remember was the VMAs where like him and Pusha T show up kind of out of the blue doing Runaway, Kanye famously hitting the key, which is now a thing he's done all the time when he plays the song. Very, very memorable.
Yeah.
And I mean, even before this, his album comes out November 2010. Starting in August 2010, you have Good Fridays, which is what, about, I think, 15 tracks released, one every Friday, 4 of which end up making the album at the end. So just talking about a memorable time in hip hop music, memorable time for like the blog era. Every Friday there's a new Kanye song. It's this crazy thing,
Yep.
And yeah, and then of course you get the album, and the album just completely delivers and just has so many bangers, so many intricate songs.
Yeah, and I remember this. This came out in November of 2010, right around I think Thanksgiving weekend, and
22nd. So yeah, right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I remember playing the album all winter and leading up to Coachella. Right, Kanye did a huge festival run, huge tour around My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and I think that kicked off with Coachella. And he comes out and he has this huge backdrop that's like this like Roman Parthenon type like visual with like all this like marble stuff. He has the ballerinas coming out and doing all these huge performances on stage. He gets lifted in a crane above the crowd, like even though like you mentioned the After Dark or the Glow Tour, was it called?
Glow in the Dark Tour, yeah.
Glow in the Dark Tour. This really feels like the first time I was tuned into Kanye's like artistic style really coming out in his live performances, and I think that it is something that sets him apart for me from other artists. Is he really does push the limits of what you can do on stage, how you think about a live performance. A lot of the time, we'll talk about that more as we get to some of the concerts we've been to, and you mentioned a lot of the stage design already. But yeah, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, even from the first song, My Dark Fantasy, like you mentioned, it's big, it's maximalist, it's Kanye at his most like braggadocio, but also like intimate and somewhat introspective, at least as much as Kanye can be at this point of his career, I think, as that's highlighted in songs like Runaway. I think Blame Game is also similar, although could probably cut out a good like minute and a half of the end of the song if we wanted to.
Blame Game's the one song on this I actually dislike. I also don't listen to Lost in the World or Who Will Survive in America all that much either. But everything else I love. You mentioned Dark Fantasy. It's my favorite intro track of all time. Really memorable intro track. You have that sample. You have that uncredited Nicki Minaj intro, vocals. Of course, Power was the lead single to this album, speaking to the maximalism. Really good choice, I think, for a comeback single. The music video might not have aged all that well. It's very CGI, but huge song, and I think really important for this album release. And I mean, there's so many other things. We mentioned Runaway, which is a pantheon song from him. Maybe something less remarked upon, like Gorgeous, where he's still rapping back and forth with Raekwon. Very memorable. Devil in a New Dress with the Rick Ross feature, legendary at this point. And then Monster, of course, legendary for the Nicki Minaj coming out party that it was. Not that Nicki wasn't well known or mainstream at this point. 2009, she had already started to blow. But to wax Jay-Z and Kanye and on the same song that she's on, and Ross, just a legendary feature.
Yeah, what a moment that was on the album, and that's Monster comes right after All of the Lights, which yeah, uncredited on that you have Alicia Keys, John Legend, The Dream, Drake, Fergie, Kid Cudi, Elton
Like
John,
50 people.
yeah, like just Rihanna just coming in just to probably record for a few minutes and hang out and work on this album with Kanye. He really brought as many people together as he could for this. Um, and all the songs we mentioned are probably not even my favorite tracks on the album. I think that Devil in a New Dress to Runaway are like by far my favorite 1, 2 on this whole thing. Um, I think Devil in a New Dress, that Kanye Ross, like uh, I don't know, that transition between them is just like so perfect, like and spectacular. It's really, I think up until probably Lost in the World, maybe, because I do like Blame Game even with the Chris Rock stuff. I think that's just like a perfect album to that point. I do like Lost in the World and Who Will Survive in America, but it does definitely like take a bit of a fall off from the rest of the album for me. But yeah, I mean, we talked about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, as Dave said, in our best albums of the last decade, and you can check out more on that. I don't know if we can really add too much more. Is there anything else about Dark Fantasy that you wanted to share before we move on?
Let's see. I just want to note the All the Lights remix. It's an unreleased track you can find on YouTube featuring Lil Wayne, Big Sean, and Drake. Really love that song at the time. Ran that back constantly. So Appalled, which was one of the Good Friday tracks. There was a song I didn't like too much for a while, but now I've come to really appreciate. I think notable that you see Sci-Hi the Prince featured out in the open here. Of course, someone who had been working with Kanye and then helping Kanye write songs for many years and to this day still. So that's obviously nice to see. Uh, but yeah, I mean, there's only so much you can say about this one at this point. I guess the album cover is notable. The blurred out nudity
Yeah,
for most people.
yep, yeah, and there's also a accompanying like 35-minute music movie with it. That it's like an interesting watch. It's not like anything mind blowing, but it's definitely interesting. Very Kanye. His next solo album isn't until 2013 with Yeezus, but he's working during this time. He
Yes.
releases Watch the Throne with Jay-Z, which Dave, give your quick Watch the Throne take.
Yeah, that's less than a year later. That's August 2011. So what's it like 9 months, whatever that
Yeah.
is. Yeah, so it's a good album, but it's kind of buoyed by its like biggest moments, right? There's like throwback stuff like Otis. There's really contemporaneous stuff like Who Couldn't Stop Me, using Flux Pavilion dubstep production, very in vogue in 2011, less so today. And yeah, so I feel like it's a moment, it's a song that album, sorry, that has really great moments. Of course, Paris is the biggest hit, something that both of them will still play at their own sets without the other one. But I think less of it, like there's people that'll ride for like Murder Excellence or something, and like there's still some good rapping there. But I think for the most part, Jay-Z gets the better of Kanye on the rapping side of things. But from the album cover to the production, it's still a Kanye production, a Kanye joint.
Yeah, what I agree. Watch the Throne, I think, has some really cool moments. But I don't think it it wouldn't fall very high on my list. We'll mention that when we get to it. And then just a little over a year later, or not even a year later, only a few months later, you get.
That was a year later, August 2012.
For Cruel Summer.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it said January, but yeah. So you get Cruel Summer, good music collaboration. Kanye kind of is taking what he was doing with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, bringing people in, and just kind of continuing these collaborations, putting stuff out. Dave, give me a minute on Cruel Summer.
Yeah, so I love Cruel Summer. Honestly, I think the highs are really high. Yeah, so Cruel Summer came out in actually I had it wrong too. It came out in September 2012, but for whatever reason Spotify says January. I don't know why it says that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's about a year later. I think the highs of Cruel Summer are freaking awesome. Just like this has bangers that I still listen to. People know Click. But
Yep.
Mercy, of course, was ubiquitous at the time. I love New God Flow, both Kanye's verse and Push's verse. Pusha absolutely spazzes. Really love Kanye for what went from most hated to the champion God Flow. I guess that's a feeling only me and LeBron know. Fucking bars.
Yeah.
The Morning's awesome. And what's that?
Don't Like. I mean, that's
and of
was
course,
a really popular
Don't
song.
Like is one of my favorite Kanye associated songs ever. Notably, the extended version of the Don't Like remix that you got to find on YouTube. Whenever they play this song anywhere, whenever Pusha performs this song, or Chief Keef performs this song, it's not the extended version of the extended Pusha T verse. It always pisses me off because I know all those words. Nobody else knows all those words. They never play the extended version. The extended version is better. Yeah, Don't Like's amazing. Another great example of Kanye finding someone to make his muse, even if briefly, right? Chief Keef was 16 when Don't Like happened. Of course, his fellow Chicagoan, the genesis of Chicago drill music, which is still going on today, getting this high profile remix, which I think is great, huge moment. Then, of course, we get Chief Keef coming back around on Yeezus a year later, Hold My Liquor. So I think as a label album, as a good music album, it falls a bit short because a lot of the biggest moments on this are not from good music artists such as 2 Chainz, who was like basically a good music artist around this time, but not actually signed. And there's just a lot of other good music signees at the time that aren't really even on this at all. There's been talk on and off of a Cruel Winter sequel album. I really don't see it coming given how dormant good music as a label operation seems to feel like these days, but especially for the time and just reflecting back on the hits, I still really like it. And even one of my favorite like quote unquote like clunker Kanye raps, you have R. Kelly featured on this, which has an H will, of course, To the World.
Yeah.
But Kanye at the end of that song is like, R. Kelly and the God of Rap shitting on you, holy crap. Like, I don't know, I still love that shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up really well. The highs of Cruel Summer are really, really high, and just that those songs that you mentioned are just unassailable in my opinion as rap songs of that time. And we haven't really talked much about this, but just thinking about Kanye albums to this point, I mean, We Don't Care. You mentioned having like the children's choir behind them, having it's like a really pleasurable like first song. Heard Him Say with Adam Levine, very like nice, fun song. Graduation starts with Good Morning. You have My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy with Dark Fantasy. Kanye starts all of his albums with these really great openers usually, and then June 2018 or June 18th 2013, you put Yeezus in, and the first thing you hear is On Site. And I remember listening to this with my fiance, second time I'm going to mention her, Julianne, and we both were like, what the fuck is this? And this shit, the first listen, I was like, what the hell did Kanye do? The second listen, I was like, holy shit, this is fucking amazing. And I feel like that's the way a lot of people have thought about Yeezus. That first listen is so jarring because it's so different from everything Kanye did up to this point. But it's such a strong album, start to finish. It really
aged like a fine wine, baby.
Yeah, amazing.
Once you're removed from the to some disappointment, but to many just bewilderment, confusion. Once you're removed from that and you reflect back on it, listen back on it, once again, sounds very instructive of what is to come, but just really holds up. I remember the famous quote from Kanye. He's like, people would have liked Yeezus more if Blood on the Leaves was the first track, not On Site. Something that's more inviting sonically, even if, of course, lyrically, it's not an inviting thing at all. I love Yeezus to this day. I love the album cover, a nod to Rage Against the Machine. It's steal this album cover. But something I just still associate with Kanye, like we had this whole discourse with when Donda came out, just an all black cover. And Donald Glover tweets, I love being influential because his album from 2020 was an all white cover. Then you got Lupe Fiasco chiming in because his Food and Liquor 2 was already an all black cover from 2012. To me, though, I think of all of this recently, I still think of Yeezus, which came out after Lupe album, but the Yeezus cover is just so stark and awesome to me. And I have plans one day to like make like a print poster of it and just put it on the wall. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, and we both went to we went to multiple, I think.
So you saw him in the city. I only saw him the one time at the stop, right?
I saw him twice on the Yeezus tour. Once at Madison Square Garden and one time at the Times Union Center in Albany with Dave. And this is just an amazing show to see. He has this huge like mountain pyramid type thing behind him. He's comes out and he's got like altar servers leading him out on stage, carrying crosses, a lot of Christian imagery with this. And he's wearing the masks, right? He's wearing like his normal or Kanye attire to this point, but with these sparkly masks, these like really elaborate costumes. He's got people running around as like monsters on stage with these red eyes. Like he's really doing a lot with this, and it all really worked. Like it was just such an amazing show to see.
He had white Jesus there.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just like thinking back. It's even hard to like really explain. I remember coming out of the Madison Square Garden and meeting up with some friends and just like trying to explain to them what we had just seen. And they were like, "What are you all talking about?" It's just a singular experience.
Also, given that this tour took place 2013 fall or spring, winter 2014. Phone quality recordings just aren't up to snuff. So like I don't really have anything, like I didn't really capture anything that good from it, honestly, just because my, whatever I had, Galaxy S3 or whatever at the time, just it wasn't there, So I wish I had better stuff to reflect on. Heck, even when I saw him later at the Meadows in 2016, I still don't have good like phone video.
No. And you also are more prone to be like down in the shit. I kind of sit back more and get the full view, but you're always in it, so it's hard to get good footage there. I think it's important to kind of think about who Kanye is working with for this album, right? Daft Punk is given producer credit on a lot of these tracks, at least the first couple, and then some near the end as well.
Justin Vernon, notably.
Gesaffelstein, who we've talked about.
Hudson Mohawk also is on this, who had been signed to Good Music as well as producer.
It's also the first time we're seeing people like Travis Scott start popping up with some credits on here.
He was barely rapping at this time. I think the Al Faro debut mixtape came out either right before or right after this. And if you remember at that time, Travis Scott was a lot rawer. Just obviously we know the performing side, but as a vocalist, he was a lot rawer and unrefined. And Kanye had found that and signed him originally just as a producer. People kind of forget it so long ago. Travis came up as a producer. This is, I think, his most high-profile performance as a vocalist to this point. So quite notable.
Yeah, and thinking about Twisted Fantasy, there's been some interviews Kanye's done where he's talked about how he was in such a place of on the outside of the public persona and public acceptance that he almost felt like he needed to like create an album that was like unassailable and that people were definitely going to love to kind of like get back in the good graces. And he obviously accomplished that, but I think the underlying message there is that maybe that's not exactly the album he wanted to make. Yeezus feels exactly like what Kanye wanted to do during this time, right? So I believe he's already either in a relationship or possibly married to Kim by this point.
I think they were just dating at the time, but they were together for the recording of it.
Very famously, the Bound 2 video has her straddling him on a motorcycle. Very strange video that James Franco and Seth Rogen spoofed, which is pretty funny. But Kanye's got a lot of interesting, very public stuff going on in his life during this time. And this is an album that I think you can really dive into, like the themes of it, the song order. I think you can kind of read into like him doing this whole like, falling apart and coming back together, redemption type arc, finding redemption through love type of theme. If you want to, you can read a lot into it, but just to kind of go to the simplest form, the tracks are great. Songs like Blood on the Leaves, like you mentioned, Black Skinhead, New Slaves, I think are the like obvious ones that people like. But I really like songs like I'm In It or Send It Up. Like those really stand out to me as just super strong tracks where Kanye's really, you can hear the Gesaffelstein influence
Yeah.
on Send It Up, right? Like that song is just like so dark, but just really works so well.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe this is the first time Kanye had worked with Rick Rubin, obviously a co-founder of Def Jam, but Rubin really helped Kanye craft this, and I think notably by trimming the track list, trimming the songs. And there's famously songs that were created during this time that were too melodic, too radio friendly to make Yeezus. So you could just tell, and it's so refreshing to remember that the Kanye vision, and with help from Rick Rubin, Hoffelstein, whoever, the Kanye vision was so precise, and Kanye still had a huge grasp on his vision, a complete grasp on it, right? I'd say also notable, this is the last album that was released by Kanye on Rockefeller Records. Rockefeller, as a imprint of Def Jam, would go defunct later in 2013. So everything else since then is just, Def Jam and good music. And also, very famous release day for hip hop heads. Notably, alongside Yeezus, you got J. Cole's sophomore album, Born Sinner, and Mac Miller's sophomore album, Watch Movies with the Sound Off. So I remember the day vividly just because it was a huge treat for everyone, especially because at the time, a lot of people who weren't into Kanye, giving us like garage sampling and stuff were like, you know what? Nah, it's about this J. Cole right now, man. This is something I understand. And obviously people, myself included, still really like Born Sinner as a record. But I mean, Yeezus just stands up as such a singular work. And again, something only Kanye could have done. I mean, you named all the best tracks already. So it's something I still really appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we don't hear from Kanye again until 2016. Life of Pablo, which, like we said, this is one of the first albums we really, well, this is like probably the first big album we talked about on the pod. And this is an album I went back to very recently, even prior to deciding to do this, in the lead up to Donda. Very famous rollout. Kanye having a fashion show through Adidas. At this point, he's like the head curator or whatever his title was for them at that point. And the imagery of him and Kid Cudi jumping up and down and Father Stretch My Hands. It's such a vivid image in my head that I probably will never forget. But Kanye playing it live, not putting it out, playing Ultralight Beam on SNL, album not dropping right away. I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna change this. So the album kind of changing. How long is it? What tracks are out? And there was a lot of stuff. It was originally put out as Waves was going to be the title, and then he, I think, changed it up. And there's like a famous picture of like the track list with like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, a lot of themes, around it. St. Paul, Pablo Picasso, Pablo Escobar, all these different things Kanye supposedly talking about. Pablo's long, it's bloated. Not every track hits, but I think the highs of this are really, really high. It's if nothing else, we got Ultralight Beam, Famous, and Father Stretch My Hands Part 1 and 2 out of it. So I'll count that as a win for Kanye fans. But Dave, your impressions of The Life of Pablo.
Yeah, just why I have it in my head. It's kind of funny to like think about what was tweaked post-release with Life of Pablo. Like, remember, I'm a Fixed Wolves, obviously the famous quote as you said, but like Wolves with Sia and Vic Mensa, the Frank Ocean outro gets removed, becomes Frank's track. And then you add like Silver Surfer intermission, which I believe was combined with something else before. And then St. Pablo, just a completely other song, just added on to the bottom. It's like, I think that's like really it. And there was a few changes to like some lines, but like the tweaking is so hard to like keep track of at this point because like all the key moments are still there. If anything, I think the more interesting tweaking had happened behind the scenes before the album came out in any fashion, like with Chance the Rapper being the featured artist on Waves instead of Chris Brown. That's something that I find more interesting.
Yeah. I kind of wish it had remained Chance, but Chris Brown does sound pretty good on that track. What songs other than maybe the first four really do you find yourself liking off this?
Yeah, like you said with the first four, uh, Father Stretch My Hand, super memorable for the first time you hear it. Also, when you hear part two for the first time, which is basically just Designer's Panda,
Mhm.
just hearing that for the first time, you're like, what the fuck is this? Who the fuck is Designer? It's obviously very notable. I really like Feedback, which is coming off right after that, towards the top. I think Real Friends, in terms of Kanye rapping, is perhaps the strongest on this whole album. At this point, Kanye maybe not having the pen he used to have was starting to come up. Thankfully with Pablo, he still, for the most part, had a vision he could keep straight, knew what guests to bring in, good ear for production still. But like the pen was starting to slip a little bit. So like hearing something like Real Friends, even hear something like No More Parties in LA, I really enjoy. And like Facts and Fade. Facts is kind of like what Drake's Jumpman, basically, Charlie Heat version. Charlie Heat production really stands out to me. And Fade, we obviously know from the Tiana Taylor performance in the video, production stands out again.
Yeah.
I don't know if I love Kanye's performances on those songs. I feel like the beats kind of steal it from me. I do like Wolves. Yeah, Wolves is cool. Wolves is unique.
Ooh, yeah, that definitely stands out. I think you hit all of them. 30 Hours, I think, is probably the track I like most. And it's so funny because you just have Andre 3000 just 30 hours, but like really, I don't know, it's very memorable. And I wish we had gotten, except I think there's rumor that he was actually going to do a verse for that. I don't know if they just cut it or it just never came to light, but yeah, the after those first couple songs, I think there's a lot of good stuff on here. I like Waves just because it stands out so much and is like it almost sounds like a track from like 2009, like Chris Brown album, So it sounds a little old, but I do like it. But a lot of it is pretty forgettable. I think not things that really push it to the top tier for me. So
yeah, like Highlights with Thug, pretty unmemorable. FML, The Weeknd's performance on the chorus is nice, but that's about it, honestly. But still, I think it's still a lot of songs. Like obviously, people really love Ultralight Beam. Ultralight Beam's memorable, especially for Chance's performance and Famous.
yeah,
Awesome Rihanna chorus, the Taylor Swift line, iconic at this point. So I still think when you run it up, there's still a lot of memorable stuff here, but it's kind of like more fits and starts, song to song or part of song to part of song, than like a full vision the way Yeezus was so clearly complete.
Yeah. It felt definitely more disjointed. And Kanye's attention, is pulled in a lot of directions at this point. We mentioned he's doing a lot with fashion design. He's got a very famous and high profile relationship at this point, in marriage at this point, I should say. And he's doing a lot of production a couple years later during the Wyoming sessions, which we talked about extensively, but producing for Nas, Tiana Taylor, did a album Kids See Ghosts with Cudi.
Pusha T.
Yeah, Pusha T, right. Very famous during that
Drake
time.
Drake beef explodes at this time.
Exactly. So he's, and very publicly also dealing with mental health issues, which he talks about, and it's obviously right on the cover of his album. I love being bipolar, or I hate being bipolar.
It's
something
awesome.
like that. Yeah, it's awesome. So, Kanye's got a lot going on. He's also doing smaller. To this point, Yeezus' 40 Minutes had been his shortest album, and Ye is I think like 24 minutes, 23.
Yeah, 7 tracks. That was the whole thing with these Wyoming albums. They were going to be short.
Yeah, only 7 tracks for each one. Ye, looking back, I think kind of continues the Life of Pablo run where it's just like not at that same level anymore. There's still moments and tracks that really stand out, and it's still pretty interesting, but it just does not grab me the same way past Kanye's projects do.
Yeah, and then because it's so short, it doesn't have enough time to grab you when it's not like this super tight 7-track thing. So it's basically like Pablo but lesser. just because both literally there's less of it, but also like it just doesn't have time to make an impression. There's still stuff that stands out. Like I like Yikes just as a fun
Yep.
like song, and I love No Mistakes for the um what is that? Curtis Mayfield? Who's the
I think it's Curtis Mayfield.
hold on, no. It's Charlie Wilson. Sorry. The Charlie Wilson feature on the chorus I love. But I guess like the big takeaway at the time, and I guess still now, was Ghost Town for 070 Shake's
Yeah, that's the moment.
performance. But yeah, there's only a little bit. I think shout out Partisan Fontaine, who was very involved with writing on this album and on Everything Went Wyoming at the time. But yeah, I mean, it's not bad, but it's just so slight that it's like a lesser Pablo, really.
Yeah, and even the tracks that aren't great, like I thought about Killing You, not a track I like, but it's memorable just because of obviously the lyrics, but also Kanye's
Premeditated murder.
Yeah, exactly. A song like Wouldn't Leave is just like a really nice like love song, basically. So there's there's moments to it, but it just does not live up to Kanye standards. I don't know if we had spent a lot of time on Ye. Is there anything notable that you want to mention?
I don't think so. I mean, youtube.com/Nostalgia Pod, we have a 15-minute review on this, but I think people know Ye's towards the bottom.
Yeah, and Kids See Ghosts I think is a better showing from Kanye, and
for sure. I mean, Reborn alone is the best verse of anything he had done at the time.
Yep. I also really like Free off that, and Cudi Montage is also one of my favorites. But Jesus is King comes out just a year later. Kanye's really leaning into his faith.
Year and a half, end of October 2019. Yeah.
And this is I'm just gonna say my least favorite Kanye album. It just doesn't really have the moments for me or the tracks. And I get that this is kind of his like he's really trying to lean into his faith and things that seems to have really gotten him through some difficult times, but I think the only song I really find myself coming back to at all with this is Use This Gospel. With Clips and Kenny G. Like that's really the only track. There's a couple in the middle. Water stands out just production wise. God Is and Hands On. I guess that maybe that run is like the part of the album I like the most, but overall I just kind of don't find it very interesting. What about you?
Yeah, same. I really like Follow God just because that's a Kanye banger that almost doesn't fit on the rest of Jesus King. I give Jesus King credit though, because it does feel like a full vision and it is quite cohesive. And post Pablo, even including Pablo, that hasn't been something we've been saying about Kanye for a 5-year span at this point. So I give it credit for realizing a vision, but it's still a gospel with hip hop vision. So it's not really for me. You would actually follow this up with a Sunday Service album that came out on Christmas in 2019. I actually haven't even listened to that, honestly, because it's not really Kanye rapping. But Jesus King. I guess the biggest takeaway for me is that we got this instead of Yandhi. Yandhi leaks, but never actually comes out. And there are some Yandhi leaks that are a lot more interesting, and in case of New Body, just better than anything on Jesus King. Alas, that's not what happened.
Yeah. And then we've talked about it recently, but Jesus is King is the last album before Donda, which just dropped this year. And check out our review for that. I don't know if we need to go too long on Donda. A few weeks removed from
Kanye went too long. We know that.
Donda returns to the long Kanye album. 27 tracks, almost 2 hours, and just to summarize, I think my take on it, I think there's like a really strong 5 songs in the beginning and like a strong 5 songs near the end. That if you put that together, made a 10-song album, maybe with a couple others, it would be like a pretty strong Kanye record. But it's just bloated, and a lot of the tracks just sound unnecessary or not really that interesting.
Yeah, I think lyrically, on the best moments, it's clearly Kanye's best work since at least Pablo, specifically when he's talking about his divorce, ongoing divorce from Kim. he still gets the best out of many guests on
Mhm.
this, such
Yep.
as 504 and on Off the Grid, The Weekend on Hurricane, etc. So it has a lot of Kanye trademarks when you can find them. The problem is it's too bloated, and it just feels like an example of Kanye being unable to wrangle his vision and
Yeah.
keep his vision straight. And his inability to curate on Donda is a new phenomenon and really
Mhm.
frustrating, because if Donda was half its long, be a lot better,
Yeah.
because there are some really great highs on Donda and some classic Kanye ass shit going on. But it's just too bloated and it's too hard to keep track of it half the time. And I don't want to make a playlist of my Donda. I want Kanye to release a good Donda, but that's not what happened. And it's frustrating I feel like that's what's sitting with me the most about Donda a few weeks later. So
Yeah, and at
annoying.
this point, Kanye as a public figure, quite reviled for his support of Donald Trump. We talked about, as he's doing the lead up to the album release and doing the Apple Music or Apple TV listening parties, that he
Yeah,
brought on
live
Marilyn
streams.
Manson, and just him as a public figure at this point is challenging to grapple with, and a lot of people have kind of tuned out. If you go on Kanye's Wikipedia, there's a pretty long section about controversy, and with like multiple different sections, and a lot of them are within the last like 4 years. Jay-Z calls him out a bit, not necessarily super strong, but on the first, I guess like first real track, Jail, he talks about like take the red cap off, we're going home, like type of thing. Like, uh, Kanye at this point, as a person, we alluded to this in the beginning, has become more provocateur than like thoughtful, like leader, which is a sad state to see him in. Potentially, he could get back there, but I think he has just a long way to go. And um, yeah, I think you summed up Donda really well. Why don't we move on to the rankings? This one was tough for me, Dave.
Yeah, it's
Not
definitely
not gonna
challenging.
lie. And especially when we're doing things like putting saying this is a D tier Kanye album. I mean, I see on your screen, if you're watching youtube.com/nostalgia pod, and if you can see Dave's screen, he has like the his rankings up in different tiers. Putting anything that Kanye makes as like F, E, or D tier is really funny to me, because it's like, compared to other artists, these would probably be in like B or A tiers for a lot of
Right.
them. So
Yes.
this is all on the Kanye curve, of course. But why don't you give me yours, and then we'll run through mine, because I think going back and forth is hard.
Yeah. So I think there's a clear bottom of Jesus is King and Yay.
Mhm.
And I consider that its own bottom tier. That's the F tier, as it were. I decided to have Ye last and Jesus King slightly above just because of the vision. Even if I'm being honest, I actually like listening to more of the Ye songs.
Yeah.
But just as an album construction, I feel like Jesus King is slightly ahead.
Mhm.
So that's where I have at the bottom.
Yeah, so my at the bottom for me is Jesus is King, Yay. And I guess if I was tiering him like you, I probably would have him similar, where that's like the F tier. I have the same order as you with Donda. I don't know if I put Donda in the same tier as them, but it's
Yeah, I have it a step
definitely,
up. I put it in E.
yeah. So I think we would be similar there. And then I also have 808s as my seventh album,
Yep.
which you also have, and I had that in a different tier as well. And I think I'd put Pablo in that tier, just because looking back, Pablo has some really high highs, but I just think there's just too much blow and not enough memorability in the second half. So
Yeah, I'd imagine to most people, me having Pablo above 808s is not what they would do. But 808s, I've never really connected with it. But yeah, it does have a stronger vision. And if I was going off of how I just ranked Jesus as King, I suppose I would rank it higher. But I just like Pablo songs more.
yeah, it's interesting. I went back and forth between 808 seventh and Pablo sixth a lot. I could probably flip them tomorrow if you talk to me about it. I think 808s is a little bit more like complete in terms of like vision, but Pablo's highs are just so much higher. So re-listenability obviously plays a part in these. So then for me, I have late registration as my fifth. And then I had Yeezus as my fourth. I see that you have College Dropout next, right?
Yeah, I have College Dropout as my 5th and Late Registration as my 4th. Now, going into this prospect, I was like, all right, College Dropout number 2, blah, blah, blah. And the more I thought about it, the more I listened to everything, I was like, you know what? It's actually going to be down a few. And then when I really like thought about it, song to song, I connect with Late Registration more. And specifically, again, I think the rapping is stronger on Late Registration. I know there's a lot of nostalgia with College Dropout, but I think, and it might even be a tighter record, but for me, the highs Late Registration are just a little higher, so I have it there at 4.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would see that as a hot take, which is it's kind of nice because usually I feel like our rankings are pretty cut and dry. But yeah, so I had Yeezus as my 4th, and then Graduation 3rd, College Dropout 2, and then My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy 1. So, and really, Dropout and My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy are 1A, 1B for me type of thing. But I see for you, you put My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy a tier above everything else.
I did. Yeah, so I have Yeezus 3rd, Graduation 2nd, Fantasy 1. And it's really just an admiration for Yeezus, which I feel like is so complete and so unique.
Yeah.
And I think that if anything, that's the hot take, having Yeezus 3. To many people, it's not even top 5,
Yeah.
But I think it stands up so well. But then Graduation, another thing that I was like, you know what, Graduation is more commercial. Surely that won't be above College Dropout. But when I ran back the songs, I was like, man, there's just so much undeniability about the Graduation run that I just had to keep it there. So, and Dark Twisted Fantasy, as we said, favorite album of the 2010s, as close to flawless as he's gotten for me, and an easy choice for the number 1.
Yeah, I think Graduation, Twisted Fantasy, and Yeezus they deserve to be in Kanye's top 4 for sure. And then I would obviously put Dropout in there. I think you made a good argument for why Dropout's a little bit lower, and really those top 5 albums are just unassailable to me. Albums that I just love, go back to a lot, and just are really impressive works. And that's the thing, is Kanye really is like a musical and production genius, and he says it a lot. And it's kind of a joke at this point because he presents as so narcissistic, so often. But the influence he's had, as I think we've made a pretty good case for, it's undeniable. I just wanted to wrap up real quick. Let's say you had to throw the collaboration albums in here. Where would they fall for you?
Ooh, interesting. Yeah, so I'll just say off the jump too, there's probably some people out there that would have 808s in their top 5, and I just will not hear any of that. That's ludicrous to me. Alas. Watch the Throne, Cruel Summer. I'd have Watch the Throne in the C tier with Pablo.
Yep.
I have to give it a full run back. Maybe it's ahead of Pablo for me. It's not cracking the top 5.
Yeah.
And then Cruel Summer, I love the highs, but it's obviously a flawed record. So I'd have that with the 808s tier. I guess I'd have it below 808s because 808s is more complete.
Yeah. I think I'd probably put them all, honestly. Watch the Throne, Kid Cudi, and Cruel Summer somewhere around my like 808s Life of Pablo area. Just because there are some really great moments on those, but none of them feel as essential or as complete as those first 5 that we mentioned. So again, an unassailable top 5 album. So, and spanning 2 decades, pretty amazing. Last question for you, Dave, as we wrap up. Favorite Kanye collaborator? I wrote down 4 that I guess really stand out. 3 of these are in a different tier than the 4th one, but I just felt like we had to include them at this point. Cudi, Jay-Z, and Pusha are like the 3 that really stand out to me. But then also he's worked a lot with Bon Iver basically since Yeezus. And it's, even listening back to Yeezus, Bon Iver is way more involved in that than I had first remembered. So
yeah, I think that's the 4. Yeah.
Who would you say your favorite is there?
Man,
it's tough. I think Cudi,
probably Jay-Z. I think.
Ooh,
over Cudi.
What would make you pick that?
Just like Jay-Z and Kanye going back and forth on "Gotta Have It" off "Watch the Throne." I don't think he's matched that with anyone else.
Yeah, that's true.
That he works with a lot.
Yeah, I just think I really like the Kanye Cudi songs a lot. Even songs off Cudi stuff like "Erase Me," or
That's a good point.
yeah, I don't know. I always enjoy them together. And whenever Cudi shows up, I'm just like, man, he kind of just gets the best out of him somehow. It's really awesome.
He does. No question.
Yeah, and it's funny because probably the best song out of any of the collaborations we're talking about with Pusha is probably the best song with Runaway. So it's like he just gets great work out of all the people he works with usually. So that's the Kanye breakdown, the deep dive. Give us your rankings, give us your thoughts. Where do we mess up? What do we miss? SoundCloud.com/nostalgiapod, YouTube.com/nostalgiapod, and NowstalgiaPod on Twitter. Dave, any last thoughts?
Just make sure you subscribe. More rankings coming. Movie directors, album artists, plenty on the way. And there's other rankings already out there on YouTube. Drake, J. Cole, Tyler the Creator, Brockhampton, Anderson .Paak, Quentin Tarantino, Wes Anderson. Tons of other rankings to get into. So get into those.
We'll catch you next week.